Part 1. Before anything appears, there is the clear openness. Not a thing, not an object, not something that can be pointed to and held by a word. It is simply the quiet ground where everything becomes possible. Invisible, infinite, untouched by form. The moment a person tries to name it, the name becomes a thing, and the thing is already smaller than what it points toward. So the wise do not trap it in language. They only gesture toward it. From that openness, movement begins. Not objects yet. Motion. Energy stirring within stillness. Rhythm emerging where there had been silence. The ancient teachers described this unfolding in different ways, but they were watching the same mystery. Energy becomes frequency. Frequency becomes vibration. Vibration becomes form. Some speak of this as the breath of creation. Others speak of the hidden order of the universe. A scientist might speak of energy, frequency, and vibration as the underlying structure of reality. Different languages, different symbols, but each pointing toward the same unfolding movement. Now watch what happens when vibration touches matter. Imagine a plate resting in stillness. Dust scattered across its surface. Nothing arranged. Nothing organized. Just quiet grains resting without pattern. Then the plate begins to vibrate. The dust moves. Not because the dust understands anything. Not because the dust decides to create beauty. The dust simply obeys the movement passing through the surface beneath it. Where the vibration is strong, the dust is pushed away. Where the vibration becomes still, the dust gathers. And suddenly, a pattern appears. Lines form. Curves form. Geometry emerges where motion finds balance. The observer looks at the pattern and begins speaking about the dust. People measure the shapes. They analyze the design. Some even believe the dust itself created the pattern. But the dust created nothing. The vibration created the pattern. The dust simply revealed the writing of motion. Change the frequency and the pattern dissolves. Change the frequency again and a new geometry appears. The shapes change because the movement beneath them changes. This is the first lesson. The pattern is not the source. The movement beneath the pattern is the source. Now look deeper. From motion comes form. A point appears. The point extends and becomes a line. The line bends and becomes a curve. From these simple relationships, the geometry of the world unfolds. Mountains follow these forms. Rivers follow them. Plants, bodies, storms, and galaxies follow the same language of motion becoming shape. Yet, even geometry is not the beginning. Because vibration itself requires something deeper, a field where movement can occur at all. An open background that allows energy to move and patterns to arise. Without that openness, there is no vibration. Without vibration, there is no pattern. But the openness cannot be captured by language. The moment the mind describes it, the description becomes another shape within it. Words freeze what is alive. So the teachers of many traditions spoke carefully. In China, Laozi spoke of the way that moves through all things without forcing them. Zhuangzi laughed at the idea that reality could be trapped inside definitions. Confucius looked at human life and said that if the universe has an underlying order, then people must learn to live in harmony with it through right relationship and balance. In India, the sages spoke of the ground of being from which all forms arise, saying that the deepest self and the deepest reality are not separate. The Buddha looked directly at the mind and saw that what we call the self is not fixed, but a pattern constantly forming and dissolving. In Greece, philosophers spoke of logos, the hidden order shaping the cosmos. Hermetic thinkers later spoke of correspondence between the small and the great, recognizing that the patterns of the universe echo themselves across many levels. Different lands, different languages, different symbols. Yet each tradition was circling the same observation. What we see in the world are patterns, but the patterns are not the source. They're traces of a deeper movement. Now comes the strange position of the human being. The mind trying to understand the pattern is itself part of the pattern. Thoughts are like dust on the plate. Movement passes through consciousness and patterns of meaning appear. Ideas gather. Ideas dissolve. Ideas gather again. The pattern begins asking questions about the pattern. This is the paradox of philosophy. We stand inside the movement while trying to describe it. And when this is finally seen clearly, something changes. The wise person no longer argues about the dust. He no longer clings to names. He observes. Forms arise. Forms dissolve. Civilizations appear and vanish. Ideas emerge and fade. Yet the movement beneath them continues. The vibration remains. The silent openness remains. And the one who sees this clearly no longer claims to be the author of the pattern. He simply watches the dance. Amen. Let it be so. Make sure you're sticking to the narrative. Everything we were... Okay, now... You... So... Unless... And there... So... You... Now... And I don't like being insulted either by your ignorance. Part 1. Before anything appears, there is the clear openness. Not an object. Not a thing that can be pointed to and held by a word. It is simply the quiet ground where everything becomes possible. Invisible, infinite, without form. The moment a person tries to name it, the name becomes a thing, and the thing is already smaller than what it points toward. So the wise do not trap it in language. They gesture toward it and move carefully around it. From that openness, movement begins. Not objects yet. Motion. Energy stirring where there had been stillness. Rhythm emerging from silence. Many people across time have described this same unfolding in different ways, but they were all noticing the same movement. Energy becomes frequency. Frequency becomes vibration. Vibration begins shaping matter. Some speak of it as the breath of creation. Some speak of it as the hidden order of the universe. A scientist might describe it in the language of energy, frequency, and vibration. Different words, but each pointing toward the same unfolding process. Now watch what happens when vibration meets matter. Imagine a plate resting in stillness. Dust scattered across its surface. Nothing organized, nothing arranged. Just quiet grains resting without pattern. Then the plate begins to vibrate. The dust moves. Not because the dust understands anything. Not because the dust decides to create beauty. The dust simply follows the movement passing through the surface beneath it. Where the vibration is strong, the dust is pushed away. Where the vibration becomes still, the dust gathers. And suddenly a pattern appears. Lines form. Curves form. Shapes emerge where motion finds balance. The observer looks at the pattern and begins speaking about the dust. People measure the shapes. They analyze the arrangement. Some even begin to believe the dust itself created the pattern. But the dust created nothing. The vibration created the pattern. The dust simply revealed the writing of motion. Change the frequency and the pattern dissolves. Change the frequency again and a new geometry appears. The shapes change because the movement beneath them changes. This is the first lesson. The pattern is not the source. The movement beneath the pattern is the source. Now look deeper. From motion comes form. A point appears. The point extends and becomes a line. The line bends and becomes a curve. From these relationships, the geometry of the visible world unfolds. Mountains follow these forms. Rivers follow them. Plants, bodies, storms, and galaxies follow the same language of motion becoming shape. Yet, even geometry is not the beginning. Because vibration itself requires something deeper, an open field where movement can occur at all. A silent background that allows energy to move and patterns to arise. Without that openness, there is no vibration. Without vibration, there is no pattern. But that openness cannot be captured by language. The moment the mind tries to describe it, the description becomes another form inside it. Words freeze what is alive. So the teachers of many traditions spoke carefully. In China, Laozi spoke about the way that moves through all things without forcing them. Zhuangzi laughed at those who tried to trap reality inside definitions. Confucius looked at the same world and taught that if the universe carries an underlying order, human life must learn to move in harmony with it. In India, the sages spoke about the ground of being from which all forms arise. They said the deepest self and the deepest reality are not separate things, but expressions of the same underlying presence. The Buddha examined the mind and saw that what people call the self is not fixed at all, but a pattern constantly forming and dissolving. In Greece, philosophers spoke about logos, the hidden order shaping the cosmos. Later, Hermetic thinkers spoke of correspondence between the small and the great, recognizing that the patterns we see in one level of reality echo through many others. Different lands, different languages, different symbols. Yet each tradition was circling the same observation. What we see in the world are patterns. But the patterns are not the source. They're traces of a deeper movement. Put two here. Your feelings are okay right now. Yeah, you. Put part two now. Put part two here, now. Part two. The plate, the dust, and the vibration are not only a picture of matter. They're also a picture of the mind. When nothing disturbs the plate, the dust rests quietly. Nothing gathers into shapes. Nothing organizes itself into meaning. It simply sits there. The mind has moments like this as well. Before a thought forms, before memory stirs, before emotion rises, there is only quiet awareness. No pattern yet. Only the possibility of one. Then something enters. A sensation. A memory. A sound. A feeling. The vibration begins again. Just like the plate, the mind responds. Thoughts begin to move. Ideas gather in certain places and scatter from others. Meaning begins forming shapes out of experience. Where the movement is strong, thoughts scatter. Where the movement becomes still, thoughts gather. And from that gathering, patterns of meaning appear. Stories, beliefs, identity. The mind then looks at these patterns and begins to believe they are the source. It says, "This is who I am. This is what the world is." But the pattern is only a trace. Just as dust reveals vibration, thoughts reveal movement within consciousness. Change the conditions and the patterns change. Change the rhythm of life, and the mind rearranges itself again. New meanings form where old ones once stood. This is why so many teachers throughout history turned their attention inward. The Buddha watched the mind carefully and saw that what people call a fixed self is actually a shifting arrangement of conditions. Thoughts arise, gather for a time, and dissolve again. Indian sages spoke about the deeper awareness in which thoughts appear, suggesting that what we truly are is not the changing pattern, but the field in which the pattern appears. Greek philosophers looked outward toward the cosmos and spoke about logos, the hidden order that gives structure both to the universe and to human reason. Across cultures, the insight kept appearing in different forms. What we experience as reality is shaped by patterns. But those patterns arise from movement beneath them. Even civilizations follow the same rhythm. Ideas gather. Systems form. Structures appear. For a time, the pattern seems solid and permanent. Then the underlying movement shifts. Old patterns dissolve and new ones take their place. The dust rearranges again. Human history is full of this motion. Philosophies appear, religions form, scientific frameworks rise and evolve. Each one tries to describe the pattern it sees, often believing it has captured the final design. Yet the movement continues beneath every description. The deeper order of things keeps unfolding, quietly shaping new patterns as time passes. So the image of the plate and the dust becomes a teaching. It reminds us that what we see is not the ultimate source. The visible forms are traces of a deeper motion moving through the field of existence. And the mind, which tries to understand all of this, is itself one more pattern inside the same movement. Part 3. Part 3. Now the image widens even further. What was first seen in the dust and the plate, and then in the mind, can also be seen in the structure of the world itself. Patterns appear everywhere. Look at the ripples moving across water when a stone is dropped. Look at the spirals of shells, the branching of trees, the movement of storms across the sky. Look at the structure of galaxies turning slowly in the dark. The same language repeats. Point, line, curve, spiral, wave. From the smallest scale to the largest, form appears through movement finding balance. The old philosophers noticed this long before modern instruments could measure it. They watched nature carefully and saw that order seemed to emerge from something deeper than the objects themselves. In China, the sages spoke about the way, the movement that allows all things to arise and return. They did not treat it as a rigid system, but as a living flow through which opposites balance each other. Confucius looked at society and asked how human life could reflect that same balance. If the world carries an underlying harmony, then human beings must learn to live in right relationship with one another, just as elements in nature find balance with their surroundings. In the Greek world, philosophers spoke of logos, the principle of order that makes the universe intelligible. They believed that the same rational structure shaping the cosmos also shaped the human capacity to think. Later Hermetic thinkers expressed a similar insight through correspondence. The patterns we see in one level of existence reflect patterns that appear in others. What happens in the small echoes the structure of the great. As knowledge grew, scientists began observing similar regularities in physical laws. The movement of planets, the formation of crystals, the behavior of waves and fields, again and again patterns emerged from underlying forces. Even modern physics speaks about fields, energy distributions, and vibrations shaping matter. Different languages continue to describe the same observation. Forms are not random. They appear when motion organizes itself. What we call structure is simply movement that has stabilized for a time. And yet the movement never stops. Stars are born and fade. Continents shift. Species emerge and disappear. Entire systems rise and fall across the long sweep of time. The dust gathers. The dust scatters. The patterns change. What remains constant is the movement beneath them all. This is why the ancient teachers often warned people not to cling too tightly to appearances. When we mistake the pattern for the source, we lose sight of the deeper process shaping the world. The wise observer studies the pattern, but remembers that the pattern is only a trace of something still moving beneath it. Understanding grows when we learn to look through the form toward the motion that produced it. How many parts are left after part 3, you scab? Just answer me one weird. You don't need one word or one symbol. You sideways? 2. Look how long it's taken for you to answer that simple question. You want to try? How many? 2. 2 parts okay, but then next. Took you that long to. Weird. Okay. Put the next. But the next. Part 4. Now the picture turns back toward the one who is observing. Up to this point, we have looked at the dust, the vibration, the patterns that appear in nature, and the structures that emerge across civilizations and philosophies. But there is one more layer to see clearly. The observer is not separate from the pattern. The mind that studies the world is itself shaped by the same movement that shapes everything else. Thoughts appear the way dust gathers under vibration. A question forms, an idea develops, a belief settles into place. For a time, the pattern seems stable and convincing. Then the movement shifts again. A new experience arrives. A deeper insight appears. The pattern rearranges itself, and what once seemed permanent becomes temporary. This is why many traditions warned about attaching too strongly to fixed ideas. The Taoist teachers spoke about moving with the flow rather than forcing rigid control. Confucian thought emphasized balance and harmony because human life functions best when it follows the natural order instead of resisting it. Buddhist insight showed how clinging to patterns of identity and thought creates confusion because the patterns are always changing. Greek philosophy encouraged careful reasoning and observation, not to freeze the world into permanent categories, but to understand the structures through which change unfolds. Across traditions, the message repeated itself in different forms. The observer must learn to watch carefully. Not only the world outside, but the patterns forming within the mind itself. When this becomes clear, a shift in perspective begins to happen. Instead of assuming the mind stands outside the pattern, one begins to see that the mind is one expression of the pattern. The questions we ask, the philosophies we build, the sciences we develop, these too are arrangements of thought responding to the deeper movement of reality. The pattern is studying the pattern. This realization does not make knowledge meaningless. Instead, it changes how knowledge is held. Ideas become tools rather than prisons. Philosophy becomes a way of observing the unfolding of patterns instead of claiming final authority over them. The observer begins to see that everything, thought, culture, nature, and the cosmos itself participates in the same continuous movement. Dust gathers. Dust scatters. Ideas gather. Ideas dissolve. The movement continues. And the more clearly this is seen, the more carefully one learns to watch the patterns without mistaking them for the source that produces them. Next part. I said put the next part you 2026. That's right. That's how. Now, part 5. Now everything comes together. The plate, the dust, the vibration, the patterns, the mind observing the pattern. All of it belongs to the same unfolding. At first, the observer believes the patterns are separate things. The world appears full of objects, ideas, systems, and identities that seem to stand on their own. But when the movement beneath them becomes visible, something changes in understanding. Patterns are seen as temporary arrangements. They arise when movement settles. They dissolve when movement changes. The same principle repeats everywhere. A storm gathers and then breaks apart. A forest grows and slowly transforms. A civilization rises, builds its structures, and eventually fades into history. Thought follows the same rhythm. An idea appears. People gather around it. For a time, it shapes how the world is understood. Then new insight appears and the pattern rearranges again. Throughout history, many traditions attempted to describe this deeper movement. The Taoist sages spoke about the way that flows through all things without forcing them. Confucian thought emphasized living in harmony with the natural order of relationships. Indian philosophers spoke about the underlying reality from which forms emerge. Buddhist teachers examined the changing nature of experience and saw that all patterns arise through conditions and dissolve when those conditions change. Greek thinkers searched for the hidden order behind the cosmos. Later philosophers, scientists, and mystics continued exploring the same mystery in new languages. Energy, fields, motion, rhythm. Each description points toward the same insight. The world is not made of fixed structures. It is a continuous movement in which patterns briefly appear. The plate vibrates. Dust gathers into shapes. For a moment, the shapes seem solid. Then the vibration shifts and the shapes dissolve. Understanding grows when the observer learns to see both levels at once, the visible pattern and the movement beneath it. When that balance is understood, the mind becomes quieter. It no longer fights the constant change of patterns. Instead, it studies them carefully, knowing they are expressions of a deeper motion. The observer becomes part of the dance rather than a spectator trying to control it. And in that understanding, the old image becomes clear. Dust resting on the plate. Vibration moving through it. Patterns appearing for a time. Then dissolving again into the larger movement from which they came. Amen. Let it be so.